Thank you for joining today. I am Ryan Neiman, SDR Sports District Radio. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at SDistrict Radio. Like us over there on Facebook and catch all of our articles at our website at fsportsu.com. Thanks again for joining today. I am Ryan Neiman, and a lot of people today are still recovering from that heartbreaking loss the USA soccer team had yesterday in the World Cup. But hey, there's some positive signs to it that happened, especially with how great Tim Howard played. Talking about that and much more is our first guest today from Monumental Networks and Sports Talk Florida is Jim Williams. How you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing well, Ryan. And yourself?
I'm doing excellent. As I mentioned, it was a fantastic game between USA and Belgium. It was a heartbreaker, though, as they lost 2-1 in extra time in the round 16. Before we get into the Tim Howard's excellent performance, what was your overall impressions from this USA squad under first-year coach Klinsmann?
I think Jurgen did a very, very good job with the team. I think that what we saw and why we saw the team get as far as they did was that, he stressed fitness. And I think that the United States, at the end of the day, might have been the fittest club of the group of 16 that was left. Obviously, they weren't the most talented, but they were obviously the fittest. And if you look at how they literally, ran a much more talented Belgian team up and down the pitch for 90 minutes, and it took the extra time to get to that loss, but they were in every game, and I think that at the end of the day, if you can be in every game, that's all you can ask for. You can't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah, Klinsmann really had everybody buy into his belief system of, hey, anything is possible. On a grade scale, just like a letter grade, how would you grade Klinsmann in A, B, C, D, or F? How would you grade him?
I would say he got a B. I think that, and the reason he got a B and not an A was because I think that there were a couple of minor tweaks that in the game against, the game against Portugal. I think that there could have been some defensive changes that he might have made down the stretch that might very well have helped them get the win. But you can't really fault him much for that, because they played them so well for so long, and so in that 90-minute span, they would have won the game. They lost it in the extra time. So at the end of the day, I would give him a B, and I think that last night I was listening to the radio, and everybody, was calling in and was saying how fantastic a job that the United States did against, a strong Belgium team, and all of the, heaping praise on the players and on, on Klinsmann. And the radio I was listening to was TalkSport in London, and the British fans were talking so glowingly of how the United States literally didn't give up until the absolute last, blow of the whistle. And they were literally going crazy about how, well they played, how dedicated they were, how fit, how strong they were. And then they turned around and said, if the English side had half the heart of the United States side, they'd still be in the tournament. Mm-hmm. And so, here we are getting kudos worldwide from, England and from around the world, getting tweets from everybody talking about what a phenomenal tournament it was for the United States. That cannot do anything but help the United States from an international standpoint, looking at soccer and saying, wow, these guys, they're not quite there yet, but they're knocking on the door.
They're one of the most remarkable feats last night's game. Belgium shot 38 shots on the net, 27 on goal. However, it was the 35-year-old from New Jersey, Tim Howard, who had a record-setting day, saving 16 shots, but it wasn't enough. The next World Cup is in 2018, where he will be 39 years old. What is the future like for Tim Howard?
Well, I think the future is good for Tim with regard to finishing his career in the, in the Premier League, and he'll no doubt continue to play. I don't know if he will be, the keeper at the next World Cup in Russia, but we'll see. I mean, there's a long way to go. But let's just put it this way: Tim will be involved one way or another in that team, whether it's playing for the team or whether it's working with, Jurgen Klinsmann. I mean, they bonded throughout this entire process, and I think that Timmy Howard is going to be a critical part of that team, as I say, either as a player or as someone who is coaching and making sure that the next goalkeeper is as talented as he could possibly be.
And despite the defeat, how will that performance go down in history as would that be one of the greatest single game performances by a player in FIFA?
Well, I would have to say that it's going to go down. It's going to go down as a memorable performance. I don't know that it's going to be the greatest performance, but it's going to. It might have been the greatest single performance by someone from the United States. I mean, that I would say, we could probably hang our hat on that one, but not necessarily are we going to be able to, say at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. So that's what I can tell you about that. I think that at the end of the day, we have, we saw, Chicago's a great city with regard to hockey fans. I mean, so basically, we've seen hockey games where the goalkeeper has, done everything to keep the team in the game, and only to have, a freak puck slip by and lose. In this particular case, it was, a slight defensive breakdown at the final second that basically cost them, dearly. But look, 2-1 to Belgium, and to take them, an extra 30 minutes was pretty special.
And looking at the future for this USA squad, 19-year-old Julian Green made his World Cup debut, and it really just took him 2 minutes to score his first World Cup goal that made the score 2-1. Is Green one of the rising stars for this Team USA?
Well, I mean, at 19, you hope so. I mean, he's going to be playing for Bayern Munich, and we'll see. I mean, there's certainly, if he can play, he's on their reserve squad, the team, the junior team, if you will, and if he can actually make it where he's playing in the Bundesliga for Bayern Munich, then there's no question. I mean, he could very well be the X factor come the next World Cup for the United States.
Yeah,
the ratings were phenomenal yesterday. It was ESPN's highest overnight rating for a soccer match in history. And that tells you something, given the fact that the game was played basically, early in the afternoon. It creeped in at prime time here in the East, but for the most part, that was people dedicating time to watch the games, in the afternoon. So the audience was at 9.6 million for the overnight. It'll probably swell a little bit more during the day. So, keep a lookout in your newspapers and find out. But ratings-wise, it definitely helped. What else is going to help is there's another international tournament that will be played here in the United States right after World Cup that will pit the top international soccer teams that, Manchester United, Manchester City, Inter Milan, Real Madrid, AC Milan, some of the top teams in the in all of Europe, and they'll be playing a 12-city tour with the championship being played at Sunlight Stadium August the 4th, I believe it is, Sunday, on Fox, and it should be a pretty amazing tournament, to be sure.
And next, World Cup 2018, how does this team look? It's still 4 years away, but how does this team look going into the next World Cup?
Well, I think, you've got a lot of veterans that are going to have to be replaced, and so it's the next man up situation. And I think that the more and more international play that we get from these guys, and that's what we're seeing a lot of, and some MLS, some of the good players in the MLS, the better. And so I see that the United States can be held to a much higher standard by the country, because the country has paid attention to this. It now is going to want to see the team advance. And, we made it to 16, yay, let's make it now to the 8, the Final Four, to a championship. I mean, part of success is expectation. And right now, the expectation of the fans of the United States is that we're going to have something that's going to be pretty special. And I think that each one of the qualifying games and each one of the friendlies and all the time that the United States national team takes the pitch in CONCACAF or whatever tournaments that we play in whatever friendlies we play in, and whatever qualifying situations we play in, the team's going to be scrutinized, the coach is going to be scrutinized, everybody's going to be under the microscope. And that's a good thing, because that means people will be invested even more so in the game.
And looking at the final 8, Brazil's still likely the lead favorite to go to the finals, but they still have to get through Germany. Argentina in the bottom half is really favored. Do you have anybody? How do you think is going to shape up with the final 8?
Well, I think that I know a lot of people think Argentina is going to be the winner. I just wasn't overly impressed with their play yesterday. I don't know. I think that I still think it's Brazil's tournament to lose. I think they've got the talent to win it, but I also think that the winner of the Germany-France game, and I wouldn't be surprised, even though Germany has played well throughout, France is playing out of their minds. So I think that whoever wins that Germany-France game could very well be the dark horse here. But it's Brazil's tournament to lose. I expect them to win, but if in any way they falter, I think the winner of the France-Germany game will end up taking it.
It's going to be very exciting to see how this will shape up. And, Jim, I do appreciate you joining us today on a short notice talking about the World Cup. And where can we find you on the web?
You can get me at pressbox.com. It's PressboxDC or Pressbox Online. Follow me on Twitter at WordmanDC. And you can find my stuff from time to time over on SportsTalkFlorida.com.
Awesome, Jim. Always a pleasure, and have a good 4th of July weekend for you.
Yeah, enjoy.
All right, have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks. That was Jim Williams from Monumental Networks and Sports Talk Florida, breaking down USA's heartbreaking defeat to Belgium and what is next for this USA team. Coming up next, we'll be talking about the NHL draft and the results from that and what impact it has with certain teams and who was steals, surprises, who could be the potential bust, and if that number 1 draft pick was truly worth it for the Florida Panthers. We'll be right back. are back. I am Ryan Neiman, SDR Sports District Radio here. We'll be talking about fantasy football later, talking about that whole Carmelo Anthony free agency and the All-Star game as well a little bit later. But before we get to any of that, we'll be talking about the results from the NHL draft and the impact it has, and if the number one pick was truly worth it for the Florida Panthers. Joining us right now, talking about that and much more from eDraft.com. Rob Kirk is joining us right now. How you doing today, Rob?
Great, Ryan. Good to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, and as we look at this NHL draft, the number one overall pick belonged to the Florida Panthers. It was their first time in 20 years to have the first selection, and they took a defenseman, Aaron Ekblad, of the Barrie Colts, who put up 23 goals and 53 points last season, the number one overall pick in the NHL. And there's really been that school of thought that taking a defenseman, the top pick, is risky because it really hasn't worked out in the past for the Blues, as the former number one draft pick for them was Eric Johnson. He didn't pan out too well in the NHL. In your opinion, did the Panthers make the right choice by taking a defenseman with their first pick?
I think they did. And honestly, Eric Johnson isn't that bad of a pick. He actually plays in Colorado right now. He's a decent player, I would. But yeah, you're right. I mean, let's be honest here. The NHL draft is a lot more like the MLB draft than the NBA draft or the NFL draft, where you have players that aren't really going to step up and make an immediate impact. You don't really have a guy like a Crosby or a Stamkos or a Malkin or a Ovechkin that's really headlining the draft too much. So that being said, Ekblad was probably the consensus top pick by all the experts out there. He's a big kid. He's 18 years old. He's 6'3", about 215. So what you're looking at is a guy that can probably make the transition from junior hockey to the NHL, and that's the biggest thing about the NHL draft. You're looking at guys that are being drafted that are mostly between the ages of 18 and 19 years old. So when you consider the NFL, you've got guys that are in their 20, 21, guys that have played a few seasons of college football, NBA. You've got a lot of one-and-done guys, but they're able to transition into the NBA a little bit easier than hockey players are. So you've got kids that basically, some develop faster than others, and with Ekblad, you've got a guy who's pretty much in a man's body. He's an offensive style defenseman. He plays actually both ends of the ice, but he's got a lot of offensive talent, big shots, really good skater, good hockey IQ. So he's a guy that was kind of a no-brainer. There's some good talent at the top. It was a top-heavy draft. If you're a real hockey nerd like I am, then you kind of know the names and the players and stuff, and know that you're probably going to see 3 or 4 of these guys kind of step up and make an impact this year. But for the most part, like I said, NHL draft, you're more or less planning for the future rather than the right now. But yeah, Florida definitely picked the right guy.
Yeah, how soon do you see him making his appearance in the starting rotation for the Florida Panthers?
Well, I think Dale Talon, the GM for the Panthers, is probably planning on having Ekblad start the season with the Panthers. I mean, they're the number one pick for a reason. They don't have the strongest roster in the NHL, obviously. So I think they're looking at him as a guy that can probably jump right into the lineup and be maybe like a top 4 pairing. They've got some good players on the roster, but they're young and they're going to get better. So Florida's a team to look out for. They're only a couple years from making the playoffs, but they had a lot of injuries last year, some goaltending issues. But they've got Roberto Luongo down there for a full season now. He's getting up there in years, but he's still a solid goaltender. So they made some good free agent moves yesterday, and Ekblad, I think, is a guy that will be able to sort of like integrate into the lineup immediately.
Yeah, looking at the other top 4 or 5 picks outside of Ekblad, you have Sam Reinhard, Leon Draisaitl, Sam Bennett, and Michael Del Cole. Any of those players you think make another difference for their team in their first year in the NHL?
I love the pick for the Oilers at number 3. It's a tricky name to pronounce. Draisaitl, I believe is how it's pronounced. But he's another guy who is physically bigger than most of the other guys he was playing against. He's born in Germany, a centerman. He's got good size. He's also around 6'3", I think 205. And in the Western Conference, that's dominated. Which is a good team. The Kings are just one of the teams up. They've got big guys playing center. So up the middle, Edmonton, that was sort of a weakness for them. They addressed it. He's a guy that could probably make the step to the NHL. If not immediately, then very soon. He may start the season in the minors, but I would certainly expect to see him in the sweater before the season's over.
Now, looking at the draft overall, if you could pick two teams, which one had the best draft and the worst draft in this year's 2014 NHL draft?
As far as the best draft goes, again, we're talking about planning for the future. So I look at the draft day as a day that sort of kicks off the big trade. The biggest trade was the trade of Ryan Kessler from Vancouver to Anaheim. So Anaheim kind of stole the day, and in my opinion, they sort of won the weekend with the Kessler deal. Now, the deal was mutually beneficial because I thought Vancouver made it pretty well, too. They picked up Nick Bonino, Lucas Spisa, and a draft pick that they used to pick up a guy who was probably, a year or two away from being an impact player in the NHL as well. But overall, Anaheim, I think, made the best move. They got Kessler. They want him. They wanted him last year. They wanted him at the trade deadline. They've now got a really good 1-2 punch up the middle with Getzlaf at the number one line and Kessler in the second line. So, I mean, that's a really good move for them. And then they drafted really well, too, because they ended up picking up Nick Ritchie, who was a power forward. Big kid, had some injury problems in juniors, so they kind of threw up some red flags for some people. But he fell to them. They picked him up, and then a Swedish player, Marcus Pettersson, who was projected as a first-round player, who also fell to the Ducks early in the second round. So I think the Ducks definitely had probably the best draft weekend. They came away with the most. As far as who lost the draft, it's tough to say. I mean, you're talking about players that may never make it to the NHL. So you've got some teams that may reach for some players that could work out, and you got some teams that maybe picked high and they're going to end up with players that don't work out. So it's really tough to pick a team that necessarily lost the draft weekend. As far as who didn't make out that well, I don't know. I would probably say maybe the Capitals. They didn't pick necessarily that great. I don't necessarily have a problem with their draft. I just think that their past week was pretty bad for them as far as, I've got free agency on the brain, so you'll have to forgive me. I've got that more in my head than the draft itself, just because I was sort of blown away at what happened yesterday with the free agent.
You're looking at the draft as well. Were there any surprises or any late steals that did occur in the late rounds of the draft?
There were a couple players that fell a little further than you expected them to. I think pretty much the top players in the draft kind of fell, not in the same order necessarily as people expected them to. There was a couple players that fell. Like I mentioned, Pettersson for Anaheim fell a little bit further than people thought that he would. The two Sam Bennett and Sam Reinhart, people had them interchangeable in the top five. Kasperi Kapanen was a Finnish player. He was a top-rated European skater. He ended up falling actually to 22nd to the Penguins, so they kind of got him a little bit of a steal. So let me correct myself. I said earlier Pettersson, defenseman. I'm sorry, I had him confused with the Maple Leaf Nylander. But yeah, as far as the order goes, getting back to Vancouver, as far as how well they did, they traded Kessler, they got Nick Bonino, they got Spisa, they got Jake Virtanen, and they ended up drafting him with the trade, the first-round draft pick they got in the Kessler deal. And they also ended up picking up a goaltender in Thatcher Demko, who ended up falling a little bit. I guess, scouting is so subjective, and when you're looking at guys that are so young and guys that could really develop into something, special down the road, it's difficult to say. Demko was a consensus prospect, but he ended up falling to the second round to Vancouver. So, I'm sure they were happy to draft him. But it's tough to say. The draft is there's a lot of rolling of the dice there. You do the best you can. You look at all the film you can. You do the character analysis and all that stuff. You poke and prod and see what comes out. And hockey's tough, though. Like I said, it's a lot like baseball. You get some guys that are going to be diamonds in the rough. You get the sixth-round draft picks that turn into all-stars, and then you get the first-round picks that turn into busts. So,
the free agent frenzy began as well in the NHL, and some of the big news that did occur was Brad Richards took a discount to join the Chicago Blackhawks. The Toronto signed Leo Kumarov for a 4-year deal. Then the Capitals, they re-signed Matt Noskin, hard name to pronounce too, to a 7-year deal worth $40 million. He's only 27 years old. He's a great defenseman. But was he worth all that money for the Caps?
The free agency, I literally wrote an article today. My article that I was going to write yesterday was to analyze the Eastern Conference. But the free agency just blew me away to the degree that, it's the same in every sport, though. NBA free agency is going on right now. NFL free agency, when that kicks off at like midnight or on whatever day that is, people go crazy. Like, oh, who's going to be the guy that gets picked? And what ends up happening, everyone overspends for somebody that may or may not work out. And it's the same in the NHL. You've got guys that are, you don't have elite players never hit free agency. I mean, that's the rule of thumb in every sport. If you have an elite player like a top 5 at any position, he's going to get re-signed during the season because you can't let a talent like that get away from you. And Sidney Crosby will never have to, look for the next contract because, Pittsburgh's locked him up forever. Steve Stamkos in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay locks him up forever. The best players will never hit free agency. So what you're looking at is sort of the next tier of players. And, these are good players, but you're not going to win a Stanley Cup by who you sign in free agency. A lot of that comes from drafting. A lot of it comes from managing your roster, falling under the salary cap, trades that are made. A couple of the best free agents never hit the free agent market because when their contracts ran out, the teams that they, had the negotiating rights to them re-signed them before they could hit free agency. Ryan Callahan and Marion Gaborik, two of the names that people expected to be out there. Tampa Bay and Los Angeles were just like, yeah, we're just going to sign you to a ridiculous deal, and you're never going to get free agency because we want to hold on to you because we like, what you bring to the table. Niskanen won the day because, he had a great year for Pittsburgh last year. You can't take that away from him. Pittsburgh had a lot of injuries on defense. Niskanen stepped up, played well. But if you look at his career, he's 27 years old. He'll be 28 this year. He's had one good season, and that was last year. So Washington invested $40 million in a guy who's had one good season. Couple that with the fact that they gave Brooks Orpik, a guy who, can barely skate anymore. He's a good, solid, stay-at-home defenseman, good hitter, good physical player, can clear the crease. So Washington literally spent almost $70 million on two guys that the Pittsburgh Penguins were just sort of like, they just said, go ahead, go hit free agency, and Washington rewarded them with a ton of money. So the Caps sort of, they, like I said, $70 million. They gave Orpik 5 years. They gave Niskanen 7 years. So 12 years, these guys are locked up for Washington. Orpik is an old guy, 34 years old. He's going to be 40 years old by the time that contract expires. Niskanen, 7 years, he'll be, it's on the downside of his career when that contract's up. So it's a lot of money going out to players who really aren't going to help the Capitals that much. In the meantime, they really address their needs on defense. Maybe, Niskanen, he has some upside still. Orpik, you kind of know what you're getting with him, and don't be disappointed if that guy lets you down, over and over. So, the top salary yesterday, Paul Stastny, a center from Colorado, signed with the Blues yesterday for 4 years, $7 million per season. Thomas Vanek signed with Minnesota. That was a big deal. Ryan Miller, again, these are all guys that have been in the league for a little while, but just sort of like, they're good, but not great. But, yeah, maybe we'd like to have them to sort of give our roster a little bit of depth. Richards ended up with a good deal going to Chicago. That's probably a good move for him. He was robbing money from the Rangers, making $10 million a year, so that was a no-brainer buyout for them. And he goes to a team in Chicago that, the Blackhawks are loaded. They'll have salary adjustments and some roster moves. They've got Taves and Kane, two elite NHL players who, their contracts run out next year, but you better believe that Stan Bowman, the GM of Chicago, is going to have those guys inking new deals before that season even gets halfway through.
Looking at the free agency list as well, is there currently anybody on there that is the best one still available that team should be going after?
The top remaining players, that's tough to say. The market is never really that great for NHL free agency, so it's tough to say, who's still out there. You look at basically at 12 o'clock yesterday, that's when the free agent market kicked off. And literally I was having trouble keeping up with the signings because they were happening so fast and so furious on my phone. I literally had to refresh my computer just to keep up with it. And it was crazy because it was just one of those things where literally every 5 minutes there was a new rumor, there was something else going on. As far as the top remaining unrestricted free agents right now, you've got someone like, got guys that have either been bought out, who may have a little bit left in the tank, but you're looking at veterans. Someone like Danny Heatley. Last year he got paid $7.5 million by the Minnesota Wild. The Wild could not wait to get out from underneath that contract. So Heatley, if he signs somewhere, it's going to be for less than half of that. So again, these are teams that are looking to add depth. Teams that might have some holes. Might mean a team like Florida yesterday was literally adding players to their roster to get to the floor, to get to the salary floor, so that they wouldn't be penalized for not reaching the minimum for the salary cap. So, just to go off a list of players, say Heatley's up there. Mike Ribeiro got bought out by the Coyotes. Daniel Alfredson's out there. Again, these aren't guys that are real difference makers. These are just guys that fill roster spots. Radim Verbata, he's a winner, played in Phoenix last year. Well, I'm sorry, they're now Arizona. Mikhail Grabovski played for the Caps last year. They're saying that he's going to sign somewhere today. But if there was any pick that I would call marginally sexy, they're all gone. They're all off the board. The big rush yesterday was to find a right-handed defenseman. That was what everybody wanted. The Caps wanted a right-handed defenseman. Detroit was looking for a right-handed defenseman for the power play. There was Matt Niskanen, like we mentioned, went to the Caps. Dan Boyle is a right-hander. He went to the Rangers. Anton Strawman, he ended up going to Tampa Bay. So, again, it's a really thin market right now. I think, the NHL owners are probably sitting back going, probably almost like a weekend bender of drinking too much and waking up this morning going, my God, how much money do we spend on these guys? And probably doing a little reflecting, and that's probably why there's only been 2 contracts signed so far today. The only thing that came out today so far was Steve Downey signed with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Andrew Campbell, who's a minor league defenseman, signed in Arizona. So definitely there's going to be some buyer remorse about halfway through the season when these guys realize how much money they spent on these players. But as far as who's left out there, it's really slim pickings right now.
Yeah, in my opinion, the NHL draft and free agency is probably close to exciting as the regular season. And Rob, I appreciate you joining today, breaking that all down for us and what is the outlook for the free agency. And where can everybody find you on the web?
You can find me on Twitter at Kirko, Kirjko. You'll always find me tweeting and or complaining about hockey. And you can find my writing on edraft.com. I put out at least 5 articles a week there about, topical hockey stuff and a lot of fantasy hockey there.
All right, great, Rob. Always a pleasure, and have a good 4th of July weekend for you.
Thanks, Ryan. You too. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks. Have a great one.
You too.
That's Rob Kirk joining us right now, talking about the NHL draft and the free agency frenzy in the NHL. Coming up next, we have Pamela Michelle, host of Sports Infusion Armed Forces Radio Network, joining us next, talking about Carmelo Anthony and much more.